got his beach sand. Sure, well, good. Is it nice? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. We'll start at the end of this last piano piece by Miriam. I just don't feel like I want to cut it off. I'm not sure if it's you or not. Well, good morning, everyone. You're all muted, so if you want to talk, you'll have to unmute yourself. This is our adult Bible study for Boulder City United Methodist, and we are going to start our new series today, Unafraid, Living with Courage and Hope in Uncertain Times. And our first part was made up, the first 4 chapters was part 1, understanding and encountering fear. This is going to be a little different approach to our Bible study than we've done in the past, because it's a different kind of discussion group and different kind of discussion. It's not a travel log this time. So we're going to have a chance to talk about what's in the book. We're going to have a chance to talk about what's going on in our lives. I think it's going to be a really interesting series. I'm very happy we have at least the usual cast of characters. So welcome, everyone. I need to go back to my screen share. I actually did, the reason I didn't send out the notice last night is I was so busy getting ready for today. So I did prepare a PowerPoint to use based on material that's in the Leader's Guide. So today, and I'm not going to put it on my whole screen, because if I do, it will cut out all my other controls. So I don't think there's anything we have to see that's going to take up a lot of time. So today, our goals for this this session are to examine the role fear plays in the lives of contemporary people, and I think that's us. We are contemporary people. Explore biblical perspectives on fear and how God's people have been liberated from its power, and experience faith as the critical background for understanding and controlling fear. So anybody have anything they'd like to add or discuss about the session goals for this morning? If you want to talk, again, you have to unmute yourself. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on. Where do you hold your fear? So now's a chance to unmute yourself and talk about where you hold your fear. Think about that for a minute. I know when I have a fear or something, I get I think I get stressed. I I can feel it in my whole body. I get apprehensive about whatever the situation is, and I'm thinking about things like um, being out in a part of the town I'm not sure of, either in the car or coming out of a restaurant, or coming out of when we used to be able to go to events, coming out of an event, maybe taking the wrong turn, remember where the car is. I can remember a time in England, I had flown in that day and driven around all day doing stuff, and then at night trying to find the hotel. And first off, you're driving on the wrong side of the street, as far as I'm concerned, trying to remember where I am, where I'm going, trying to look at a map, trying to find where the hotel was. It was within a block of where I was, but I remember driving around, and I literally pulled over to the side of the road and said, I got to get myself together. I got to find where the hotel is. So how do you somebody want to have something that they want to share about a fear, or how they where you hold your fear, or how do you hold your fear?
I think for me, when there's fear, I always wonder what's going to be the outcome. Will it be good or bad? But hopefully it'll be a good outcome. And Scott, I can relate to your England experience because I had the same thing in Scotland. Elaine will remember that I missed the bus stop.
And for me, I don't think I have a whole lot of fear for myself, but I tend to, as a mom, I think have a lot of fear for my kids and other people.
One thing I fear is getting through something when I don't feel I have the skills for it. And it's something I've been tasked to do, and I just dread doing it.
Okay, pretend this screen is a big white pad up on front of our meeting room, and each of you are going up and writing down your thoughts. So that's what we're doing here. Okay, so we're looking for not only what do you dread. I mean, I dread a lot of different things, but how does it affect you? Do you sweat? Do you or should I say perspire? Excuse me. Do you shake? Do you get sick to your stomach? How does fear manifest itself in you?
I notice that my shoulders and my neck tighten up, and my whole body gets tight, but most of my neck and shoulders.
Stress.
That's the same for me, Lee. I carry it right in between my shoulders and my back.
I get a queasy stomach.
I start to shallow breathe, and when I shallow breathe, I don't have a lot of air to talk on, so I get squeaky, and I feel my body just stiffen up without a lot of oxygen.
I think worried thoughts for me too.
What was worried thought?
Having
Is that what you wanted to say? Okay, good. Anybody else have something else they want to share?
I think I tend to have get worried thoughts also because I expect God to answer, and I'm waiting for Him to answer needs, and I'm not seeing an answer, and I get very frustrated. How am I going to make it through without your help? I need it right now, and it doesn't always come right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. Everybody can, if you expand your little screen that shows the people, you can actually see who all's on the call, and you can see their names, except for iPad. I think iPad's Doug, isn't it? Is iPad Doug?
No, iPad is me. I was going to try and use the iPad so you guys could see me better, but it didn't work.
All right. So is Doug listening in, Jen?
No, he's with the Sunday paper, I'm afraid.
But I knew you had an iPad for him last time. That's why I put him down for iPad. Thank you. I'm just trying to get our attendance correct. Okay.
Is iPad back? I see Lee in two places then. If she's iPad and picture?
Yeah, she's not using the iPad. Is that right, Lee?
That's correct.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't hurt anything. Okay. So I'd like us to open with a prayer, or have our opening prayer. And I've reproduced it so we can all do it together. God, who calms the troubled waters, we bless you for your presence
in the midst of our fears.
and trials.
We release to you the things we hold too tightly, and we trust your words
of peace.
Be
among us in this session, and may our souls and bodies be secure in you. Amen.
Amen. All right, we'll take a minute to finish any further discussion you want to do on the where you hold your fears, or things that you want to share on that while I get the CD in for or the DVD in for the Unafraid video. I should have been doing that instead of talking so much, or typing, or whatever else I've been doing. So this should start up in a second or two.
I thought it was interesting what Hamilton statistics that he gave us, that, you know, that we seem to be less fearful the older we get. And I would say that's true about me. You know, I've survived so many things so far, what left, you know, I think I can get through them. Hello, anybody else feel that way?
Yeah, I would. Oh, go ahead. I agree. I was listening to a podcast this morning on NPR called American Resilience, and it spoke about how really since the Great Depression and World War II, I mean, we've had other things that have tried the people in the United States, but nothing to really that effect or that magnitude until what we're going through now. And it spoke a lot about different ways of coping, of course, and being resilient, but how we kind of have become complacent in believing that bad things don't necessarily happen if you live the right kind of life, where that isn't the case at all. And so having to kind of relearn that things are going to happen that aren't good and we can get through it is kind of maybe one of our lessons through all of this.
Yeah, of course, I spent most of my career in the nuclear power field, nuclear energy, radioactive material handling. And the biggest difficulty with that is the fear of the unknown. People can't see it. They can measure it. You can actually measure it with a counter in some cases, but you can't really see it or feel it, hopefully. And here we have something that we can't see or feel or even measure very easily. There's no counter there's no box we can pick up and scan somebody other than maybe a temperature, and that's only if they're having a fever. So but there's no way to determine whether the person next to you is ill or potentially ill or could be a spreader of this virus. And we've all learned to live with the common cold. We've all learned to live with a lot of things, but we haven't learned to live with COVID-19 yet. And we're learning how to live with it. So we're going to talk a lot about that. In fact, our sixth session is going to deal just with the virus. So we'll try not to spend the whole 5 weeks before the sixth week talking about the virus, although that's obviously on all our minds, and we can't help but talk about it. So I'm ready to start the video. And here we go. And afterwards, pay attention because afterwards there is a quiz. Oops.
Hi, my name is Adam Hamilton. I'm the senior pastor at the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection, and I'm the author of Unafraid, Living with Courage and Hope in Uncertain Times. And I want to thank you for inviting us to be a part of this conversation with you. I've got some great guests who are going to be joining me for these conversations and joining us for these conversations. And I wonder if you'd each just say a word about yourselves.
Thank you for the invitation. My name is Carlos Rosa. I grew up in the Methodist Church in Mexico City. Somehow I ended up in this great country, and through trying to jump with different vocations, God brought me back to work in the church. And so today I'm serving as an elder in the United Methodist Church.
My name is Marie King. I've been bivocational for a number of years. I'm a registered nurse. I'm also a faith community nurse, and I'm also an ordained clergy with the United Methodist Church, the deacon.
And I'm Ginger Rothis, and I just finished seminary in May, and am currently serving as a care minister at our Resurrection Downtown campus, and I write and teach classes for our women's ministry at our Leawood campus. And I too am second career. I was a business consultant in my first life.
Well, I am so delighted that all three of you are here as conversation partners with me, and this is a really important topic that we're covering. As we begin talking about fear, everyone struggles with fear. I've traveled around the world. No matter where I've gone, I ask people, do you wrestle with fear? What's fear look like for you? And I've yet to find a person who says, no, I never struggle with worry or anxiety or panic or fear. I mean, we all wrestle with these things. And so it's such a universal concern. And it was in listening to and hearing people talk about their fears that I thought, it'd be good to really spend some time researching this, studying this first as a pastor to help the congregation that I serve, and then for a broader audience to really talk about how do we deal with fear? How do we overcome fear? How do we live with courage in the face of our fears? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'd like to begin by recognizing that, in our lives, fear is hardwired into us. So it's not that there's something defective in us and therefore we fear. It's actually a gift from God, that God has created us and our brains with the capacity to protect ourselves. And so on the one hand, fear is a really good gift because, it helps us detect when there's a danger or a threat. It leads us to respond accordingly. And that's a mechanism that really protects and saves us. And not just us, but all creatures, they have these defensive mechanisms. the challenge, of course, is that we have a tendency to fear things that maybe we don't need to be afraid of, or we exaggerate the threat. Yeah. And then we find our brain starts telling our body to be prepared to fight or flee or to freeze. And in the process of doing that, we find that we're actually overcome by things that we shouldn't be afraid of. And so the aim of this study is really to help us be able to overcome our fears with courage and hope, and to look to see how our faith might play a role in that as well. So we're going to look to see, what have the psychologists taught us? What are the experts teaching, ordinary people? What do the therapists do when you come in and you're overwhelmed with anxiety or fear? But then we're also going to look to see, how does our faith play some role in that? And all three of you are deeply committed Christians. You are seminary trained. So we're going to look to see both how you do this in your own life, how you do this in other people's lives. And we're going to talk about various kinds of fears that we face as a society, as individuals. So some of our fears are very deeply personal. Some of them are fears for what's happening in our society or our world, or fear of other people. And over the next 5 weeks, we're going to explore each of these kinds of fears and see how our faith and how common sense and the wisdom of experts might help us overcome our fears. So I'm really excited that you're going to help us in that conversation together. And I guess I'd like to begin by remembering a story in Scripture where the Israelites have been set free from slavery. I have a chapter in the book on paralyzed by fear, a mile from the promised land. And the Israelites, who have just been set free from slavery in Egypt, are now at the edge of the promised land. 2 years in, they were right a mile from the promised land. They send us the spies into the promised land. And 2 of them come back and say, after 40 days, oh, it's awesome, we can do it, God is going to help us. And 10 of them say, we can't do it. We look like grasshoppers, and these people on the land look like giants. And tragically, they spend 38 years paralyzed by fear, a mile from the promised land. So I'd like to begin with that point, and just to ask the question, how do you see, and how have you personally experienced fear, either paralyzing you in life or the people that you know or care about? How have you wrestled with fear in your lives?
I think that there's an element of with fear, is that we want others to understand the severity of it. In my experience, I've always wanted to have, I want you to understand why I'm going through, how I'm feeling, and I feel like that is a little internal battle that we face, that often we need to set aside and try to deal with the root of what's causing the fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think for me, I felt a year away from the promised land. On my 3rd year in seminary, I was so close to graduating, and 3/4 of the way through, and was really struggling with calling. And for me, it was a fear of being in front of people, a fear of speaking for God, a fear of preaching and influencing people, and I didn't want to mess anyone up, and I took it as a huge responsibility to be a pastor, and so I almost quit seminary because of fear. And then I had to kind of reframe it. My prayer life became, God, how would you have me use this seminary education? Because I'm not seeing myself fit in this box that my friends are pursuing. Is there a different way that I could reach graduation or the promised land? And for me, it became writing. And it became that I would, instead of public speaking, it was public writing. And I still am fearful when I hit that blog post send button, but it turned into writing classes. It turned into a different kind of public speaking. So I almost gave up, paralyzed by fear, but then needed God to help me reframe it to get to the promised land.
That's really good. So how about you, Marie? Were there any fears that you've had since you were a kid? Maybe something you grew up fearing?
I have a great fear of dogs. Ever since I was a little girl, I have always feared dogs. People say dogs won't bite, but dogs will. They have teeth, they will bite. So I've been afraid of dogs all my life. I've tried to do things to alleviate that fear. And when my friends have their dogs around, I try to get closer, taking steps towards alleviating that. And for the community that I was serving, I was able to have an animal blessing one year. And I didn't lay hands on, but I did get close.
That's good. That's excellent. I think about how many times we've been afraid of things in our lives, and we fret about them, we worry about them, we stress about them. And 140 times in Scripture, we read this idea. God says, don't be afraid, or Jesus says, don't be afraid, or people are told, don't be afraid because God is with you. And I wonder what role your faith plays when you're afraid, and how do you access that? How do you come to feel that reassurance and that courage from your faith?
I think for me, it's a deep breath and recognizing God's presence. It's a pause. My faith is based on, I know God is with me and a presence to tap into always. And it's not about doctrine or dogma as much as, God, we're in this together. Get me through this moment, or I surrender it to you. And that's where my faith in I'm not alone, I think, is really my foundation.
Yeah.
For me, it's been first presenting my concerns to God and praying about whatever the assignment is before I accept it. And that empowers me. I know that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So reminding myself that God is there with me and present with me is part of the structure of my faith that gets me through.
I love that.
Yeah.
I want to wrap up this conversation together by talking about facing your fears. I mentioned in the book my daughter Danielle, who said while she was in college at Kansas State, she decided to take a skydiving class. She joined the skydiving club. And as a father who tried very carefully to protect my baby her whole life, I was glad she didn't tell me in advance she'd done this. But we're at lunch and she's telling me, it's like, what were you thinking? You jumped out of an airplane voluntarily? What are you, and I said, why did you do this? And she said, I knew that I have a tendency towards being afraid. And I thought, if I did the scariest thing I could think of and I survived, I wouldn't be afraid anymore. And I have this wonderful picture of her, and it's a little blurry. It was taken, right after she got down on the ground. She's got this huge smile on her face, and it's like she had just overcome the world and overcome all of her fears in one moment. And so that idea of facing your fears and overcoming them, what therapists call exposure therapy. I wonder if there's any way that you've done that too that you might want to share.
When I was in my second career, cooking in the kitchen, on my second day at my job, I was kind of working one of the areas that didn't require being close to the fire or going to the high-paced work. And the sous chef have gone through a situation. He started getting sick, and I was called up to say, "You're up." And I didn't know much about the recipes or the things. This was the process. I think for me it was the fear of knowing the process. It didn't mean that I didn't feel fear, but in that moment I just had to go for it and just jump right in it. And I burned myself a couple of times, but at the end it wasn't that bad. And I think it kind of allowed me to keep moving forward in that area. So
I think that's what we discover when we face our fears with faith, is we find it's not usually as bad as we think it's going to be. And then suddenly we find a new courage and strength. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your insights and your fears and being willing to talk about those things here. And this is going to be a great 5-week study. Thank you so much for being a part of it. In each of our sessions, we're going to have an expert interview, and I'm really excited about our first expert. He is Dr. David Zold. He's professor of psychology and psychiatry at Vanderbilt University. And there, as a neuroscientist, he studies the brain, and he's going to help us understand how the brain works, and in particular, the connection between the brain and fear. Dr. Zold, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining us today.
Happy to be here.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about fear and the brain. Why do we fear, and what role does the brain play in fear?
Yeah, so there is just a key role here for fear, because if we don't have it, we probably die. And if you just think of the range of threats that we have every day we go outside, you can get hit by a car, you can fall down, you can injure yourself. You have to learn how to avoid those injuries. And the way we do that as mammals is that we develop fear. So we have to have fear. It's in some ways essential for us as a species.
Yeah. Tell us about the anatomy of fear. What's going on in the brain, and how does it work?
There are some specific brain regions that we really pay attention to when we're thinking about fear. One of them, which you mentioned in your book, is the amygdala. And this is a small almond-shaped area that's in your temporal lobes. It's deep in there. It's in many ways an old structure in terms of its development in mammals. And this ends up being not the only area involved in fear, but it's really essential because it's at sort of the nexus. It's at the intersection of a whole range of motor, attentional, cognitive, and physiological responses. And it's those physiological responses, though, that we often are most aware of. Our heart beating, going boom, 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 or feeling like we're breathing hard, or even having like we can't breathe, having our hands get clammy. All these physiological responses can get triggered by the amygdala to give you that immediate knowledge, that physical knowledge that something's wrong. It both cues you to that, it also is preparing you for what actions you might need to take. For instance, you may be in a situation where what you need to do is run and run as fast as you can. And what it's doing is setting you up to be able to do that, so that you're attending to what you need to attend to, and that you're making that the priority. And then you're able to take whatever action it is you need to get safe again.
So fear clearly is a gift. I mean, it's a blessing to us that we have this capacity to do this. Where does it go wrong then? Because there's a lot of us out there who struggle with fear, and it's not over something that might harm us. We just find ourselves paralyzed by fear or overcome by fear. So what are the ways in which you can overcome that, or you treat that?
So there are a few different ways. One of the biggest is to get the person actually doing the very thing they're anxious about. I once worked with a patient who was afraid to hold a knife. And the fear was that if she had that knife, that she might hurt someone with it. But by never holding that knife, she never learns that she can do it. And you say, well, what do you think is going to happen? Well, I might stab you. Okay, let's say you're not going to stab me. What else? Well, I might go crazy. Okay, well, let's just test that. Let's actually test whether you can do this for a few minutes without going crazy. Once she learned that, then she could go another step, and then another step. And that really ends up being an essential part of any attempt to get fear and anxiety under control.
Excellent. How about worry? Worry is another form of fear that doesn't seem quite so serious as anxiety, and yet there's a whole host of people, in fact, a large number of people in our society carry a measure of worry with them. How does that play into fear and the brain physiology, and how do you overcome that?
When we're talking about the worry, it's often that it can get stuck on. It's not bad for us to worry about some things. The problem is when it gets stuck. And one of the ideas that's out there in the literature is that there's certain parts of the brain where we get loops, where one part of the brain projects to another part, and then that projects to another area, which projects back to the original one.
Interesting.
And so we often think that these loops can get into sort of a feedback mode, where once it starts, it's just circling around, like when you have a electric guitar and you start feeding back your guitar against an amplifier. Well, this same sort of circuitry can get going in a person, and then it can be really a challenge to turn it off. And in fact, a lot of what has to be done in working with people who have that sort of chronic worry is getting them to learn some techniques for being able to channel it differently.
Dr. Zoll, this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And I want to say that this is the end of our first session. We've got a great journey ahead of us as we're studying how we can live unafraid, not without fear altogether, but how we can live unafraid with courage and hope. I look forward to seeing you next week.
So, what are the fears expressed by the three people at the beginning of the video? How many of these fears have been part of your own life?
The question about having a calling, whether or not it's to be a minister or something else, you worry and you're afraid that maybe you're doing the wrong thing, that maybe you should be doing something else.
Okay. Anyone else?
I think probably the first time I was preaching that I was really nervous, fearful that it wouldn't go well or anything like that. Also, at my very first church, the senior pastor got very sick, and had fear about what would happen, but yet it was something I was able to work through in talking with the district superintendent to say, number one, that I think I could do this, and I was able to do it.
Okay. Anyone else?
I have to say that being a teacher, after you have your break in the summer, every single year I go back, I'm afraid again or nervous. And I tell the kids that. I said, you're nervous to be here and I am too. But it was like what they talked about. You just jump in and you do it. I think, what if I forget how to be a teacher? But it comes right back. So, but it's funny that it's still after, 25 years, it still happens every year.
Seems like it's not knowing who's going to be in your class this year, because every year, every class is so different.
Yeah.
You have your special children this year.
Yeah, there's different levels that we talked about. We talked about, outright fear, shaking fear, sick to your stomach fear. Talked about worry as a form of fear, and you just mentioned nervousness. Nervousness is also a form of fear. It's on the lower side, but I know I was always nervous about public speaking until I took a public speaking class at my job after in evenings. Joined the speaking group and took the I think it was the Dale Carnegie speaking stop. And I thought the most important thing I learned out of that was that make sure you know your subject and you're the expert, and therefore you shouldn't be afraid because it's your subject, it's your topic, and you've prepared for this talk. And if you tell yourself that enough times, maybe you can actually convince yourself.
Yeah, I would say I have no more fear of preaching or anything like that. I think probably what I would feel nervous is kind of what Elena talked about as she faces a new class. When I come to a new church, not knowing the people, they don't know me, what will happen?
Think about how it is to these ministers that go from circuit to circuit or go from one place to another, and just as a guest speaker, and I guess they just have to come in and not worry about it, just talk their topic, because there's no way they're going to know the people or they're going to get to know him or her more than a few minutes. Anyone else want to have one to share?
Scott, can
Yep.
you hear me? Myra? When you were talking about that, going place to place and talking, I used to do a lot of public speaking. I used to raise a lot of money. That was my job. So I would go and see multiple different groups of people. So my fear was always talking in front of a group of people that knew me. If you don't know me, it makes no difference. But if I mess up and you know me, you'll always know I messed up. But if you never see me again, it's no big deal. And of course, the one thing I have now that is rather keeping me in the house is I have severe panic attacks. So when you talk about shaking and you talk about all of those physical forms of fear, they can be absolutely depleting as far as you being able to operate in a society that requires you to be part of a social structure where you're expected to express yourself. So fear, whatever you want to call it, is very, very powerful. But instead of it always being there for our protection, sometimes it is there that actually is in a position to defeat us.
Okay. One of the things that was suggested was to Google fear. I don't know whether anybody can see this or not. Let's see if I can make it bigger. You can actually see the wording here. So I did that. And I'll find the piece that I want right here. There were 866 million results that came back with just putting fear into the search engine. It came back in less than a minute, 51 seconds. 866 million hits on the word fear. So it's obviously present and prevalent in everybody's thinking. There is enough material in this work, in the lesson plan workbook, to spend 3 or 4 sessions on the first part. And so I think we can move along, but I won't be able to cover everything that's in the book. So you got to make sure you're doing your book reading. Where am I here?
You know, Scott, in that definition, how it talked about seeing something as threatening or dangerous, I was thinking about what Myra was talking about. Sometimes I think it's maybe not even a physical threat, but a fear of, as she was talking about, the expectations that others or society puts on us, or maybe a feeling of being judged for our ability in those situations can be seen as causing fear also.
Yeah, and I think, you know, a little bit of, as I said, some fear is healthy, particularly in certain situations. So if you're driving through an area of town or a place that you've never been before, you get a little bit of afraid maybe on where you're driving or what you're doing, so you pay a little more attention, hopefully. And if you're in a very you're driving on the freeway in Southern California, I know I'm sort of fearful of that kind of driving, and I pay a lot more attention to where I am and where I'm going and who's driving in front of me or behind me than I do when I'm on the road, a place I know, which is probably the most dangerous time to be driving. So we'll have a lot more time to talk about these various aspects as we go. I do want to get to this. And that was the part about Moses and the Israelites and them arriving in the Sinai and knowing that they wanted to get to the promised land, which was a mile away or whatever they said. So they sent out the 12 scouts, and 2 of them come back and say, everything's great, beautiful place, we're ready to go. And 10 come back and say, oh no, we don't want to do that. There's big people there, and we might have to fight them. We're going to talk about Moses in one of our future Bible studies, and I just finished reading that section of the book, and it's very clear that God told Moses to take the slow way to Israel and the Promised Land because of concerns about who they might find along the way, and if they ran into trouble, the Israelites might decide it was better to go back into slavery than it would be to continue. So that's another place that that fear can come through if you're afraid of what's up ahead, the unknown. And even when you have reports, you get different opinions on what the situation is.
Scott?
Yep.
Going even before that, the one I relate to even more so is when God in the burning bush asked Moses to go to Egypt you know, bring his
Right.
people out. And he didn't want to do it. He was fearful. And I relate to that more so than the spies. And because a lot of things come up and I think, I don't want to do that. It's not something I think I can do, blah, blah, blah. But I remember that God is going to get me through it and he's with me there, but I have to take that first step. I have to, you know, and then I always find out it's never as bad as you think it's going to be.
Yeah, if you're a procrastinator on a lot of things like I am, the only way to get the room cleaned is to jump in and start cleaning, as opposed to saying, "Oh, I've got all sorts of excuses why I can't clean my room," right, honey? Okay, there's another passage that I like to share, and that's see if I can make that so we can all see it. It's from Hebrews 11:1. Faith is the reality of what we hope for, the proof of what we do not see. So what does this definition of faith tell us about the nature of faith?
Well, the underlying word that faith is translated from is the Greek word which means trust. So this is trusting. This is about trust.
Okay. Another word would be confidence.
Yeah, confidence would apply as well. Yeah.
So things will get better despite the circumstances we face in the current moment.
Yeah.
Or in the case of faith or trust, I think about we know we will get through this pandemic, but we worry about how. I don't worry about getting through it. We're going to get through it, and I know God's with us. But the unknown also of how we're going to get through and whether we're going to be one of the people who get the virus is what's hard to, that's where faith also comes in and says, no matter what, you will come out on the other side with God, you know, with God being in charge.
There is a saying, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah.
And we're certainly living in interesting times.
Are we going to have to wait 40 years for a vaccine?
Well, how many years did they wait for a polio vaccine? It was about 20 years.
Yeah.
They still don't have a vaccine for the common cold. Of course, the common cold doesn't kill quite as many people all at once. It does seem to kill a lot of people. There's so many different ways we can get killed or we can die. I think part of it is having faith that that we will get through it, and we should take the proper precautions. We're going to talk a lot more about that in part 6. That is not part of the book. It'll be the different studies that we've had going on lately. So one of the things that Adam did was come up with the word fear, and there was a definition that he put together for what fear meant. Does anybody remember what that was? Or you want to look at chapter 3? What does the F stand for in Adam's acronym introduction for the 4 steps that we would be exploring throughout this course? What does the fear stand for? What does the F stand for fear?
Both.
False, yeah.
False.
Okay. There's a different section I'm looking for. Okay, so there was false. Yeah, false.
Face your fears with faith.
There we go. So So false events appearing real is one of the things that he said was how we would see fear. But then when we consider our faith, how would we handle that fear? And the F stood for, Jen, say it again.
Face your fears with faith.
Okay. And the E?
Examine.
Your assumptions in light of the facts. And anybody else for the A?
Attack your anxieties with action.
Okay. And the R?
Release your cares to God.
Okay, good. Everybody filled the blanks in very well. There was a lot of other interesting things that were in the book. The idea of the thunder shirt, and how you might have your own type of thunder shirt or something like that to deal with things. I do want to talk about, there was a couple other quotes that came out of Adam's book. So next week, we're going to do part 2, which is chapters 5 to 8, crime, race, terrorism, and politics. If you haven't finished reading part 1, try to get that finished as well as read ahead for part 2. The video will be the same 3 people with Adam talking about different aspects of these topics. And then he'll have another interview with an outside person who's not part of his church. If you hadn't figured it out, those 3 people that were with him, Carlos, Marie, and Ginger, are all part of Church of the Resurrection. They're all playing different roles in the Church of the Resurrection. So one of the passages that was suggested we look at was Isaiah 41:10, and I'll make this big enough so we can all see all parts of it. And it was suggested that perhaps we would work a prayer around the Isaiah 41:10 verse. I'll leave that up to you to do on your own. But I do want to read this. Anybody else who wants to read it can follow along too. I do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. So that would make an easy way to have a prayer out of that. As Adam said, I think it was said 140 some times that Jesus, God, or one of the messengers or angels came down and said, what did they say?
Do not.
Do not be afraid, or fear not. It seems to me we had a sermon series and a whole set of music we did a couple years ago on Do Not Be Afraid. And I still remember that tune. I won't sing it for you. I might ask me to sing it for you. So I'm so happy everybody was able to join us this time. If you have friends who might get something out of this 6-week session, invite them to watch the video that we post, and also invite them to join us. With this Zoom virtual meeting, it's really easy to have people join in, and we want to thank Susan and Kim and Sheila, who are out of town. Kim's not far out of town, but she's out of town. for joining our group and continuing on with this session as well. I think it means a lot to me anyway to have friends who are able to join us, and Susan's becoming a good friend. We do have your book now, Susan, and we will be reading it, so we're going to get to know more about you. And thank you, Linda, for inviting Susan. So invite your friends, family, others to participate. I think it's going to be a fun, exciting series, and I'm looking forward to every week in it.
Scott, can I make one comment?
Oh, of course.
You made you made a mistake on the listing when you said the acrostic for fear on page 27. You said attach your anxieties. It should be attack.
Oh, thank you. Did I type it wrong?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, we'll go back and get that fixed right now. Because I want to have this for our, oh, you're right.
You don't want us giving you our anxieties.
Yes, thank you for finding that, because there will be other typos. That one was not a typo. It actually was a finger change. I did this pretty quickly last night. So anyway, thank you. Please find these kind of things, because I do want to keep. I'm going to keep this going, and I can share it with everybody after we're done. The PowerPoint. So they suggested a closing prayer. I decided to modify it. So this is my version of the closing prayer. And I would appreciate it if everybody would like to join in to our closing prayer. God of peace, you know
our fears before we speak. You know how fragile our faith is and how difficult our struggles. Help us to grow in faith
And to
to trust in you more.
Pray in the name of your Son,
Your Son, Jesus.
Amen.